On the Unspeakable Truth. We will do this as a prelude to the community meeting next week about how the state budget will work for people of color. Wisconsin has a reputation for being the worst state to raise a black family in. In truth, Wisconsin's discriminatory state and local fiscal policies and private actions of the past systemically held us back. That northern legacy of racism and discrimination has ensured Wisconsin to be a place of wealth for whites by cementing racial disparities in the distribution of power and wealth. What is happening with the current budget and in the Finance Committee to equalize the distribution of wealth? Can that happen when so few of the legislators in Wisconsin are black and brown? What about education in urban communities that is grossly underfunded when compared to suburban regions? Today we'll talk about all of these things on the Unspeakable Truth.
Trust what's right before our eyes.
Believe half of what you see
and a third of what you heard.
Truth, lies, fake alibi.
Welcome to the Unspeakable Truth. I'm your host, Kwaku Atrophy, and today I'm really excited because this is one of those shows where we get to talk about something and do something immediately. As you can see, I'm sitting with two of our senators. I mean, how much better does it get than that? Not only are they senators, but they first served in the Assembly, both of them, been since 2012 and 2003, so we got some experience on the panel. I don't really want to speak too much time. So people are talking about this listening session for the budget. Why should anybody come to this? Because people are saying, I know them, they're saying they're not going to listen to me. My voice is not going to make a difference. Why should they come? We'll start with you, Senator Taylor.
Well, actually, I want to give it to Senator Johnson because she's been the one that's been fighting at the state level on the budget. And although I have historically that, I think she can speak to some specific things that I know that she's had to fight for that are close to her heart. And I'll be the cleanup girl and talk about, how it connects to all the rest, because I think that that's really important for people to know what's in there, that happened at the federal level, at the state level, that they need to know.
I think it's important for people to come and learn about the budget because it intersects each one of our lives, from our kids' lives to our lives, just being able to see how the pieces are put together. The funding for schools, for your community, for your block grants, making sure that our correctional systems are adequately funded for those individuals that unfortunately have to serve time, but also making sure that our juveniles have more resources in juvenile detention so they won't continue that trajectory on to adult incarceration. Making sure that mental health is an issue and is addressed in our schools. So many times we leave that as a priority for parents. But we all know that parents are busy, they're working multiple jobs, so making sure that our children have adequate resources in the school when it comes to mental health, making sure that our schools have school nurses and the resources that they need, making sure that our per pupil spending is where it should be to address poverty and other issues that so many of our kids live in.
Because I hear that, and it's powerful. But if I'm listening, I'm like, okay, well, how does this really help me? When we think about Milwaukee City, just specifically, so you say you got 39% of the state of black people, but within the state of 6, you have the Democrats and the Republicans fighting with each other. They don't want to give us this money, so we say these things. How do we make it so that the things that we voice really is heard, and then we see that money not only spent and being fiscally responsible, but it really has an effect? How do we make that happen?
That's if I could piggyback on what the senator is saying. She tried to bring up, and she did, the things that matter to us, the education of our children. So when you hear MPS talk about there's no gym, there's no art, there's no counselors, that's because of a state budget. That has a direct effect on education. And so one of the reasons we want to be present is because you don't understand if you're not in the room. I heard the mayor say the other day that if you're not in the room, you're on the menu. Right. I've heard that phrase. Well, cut up and sliced up. And so it's really important to be there to make sure the things that matter to you. So if you have a child who has disabilities, or if you're a person who's disabled, you care about your health care coverage, but you also care, can you get somebody to help you to be able to be your aid? That's done in the state budget. At a city level, Where are the priorities? Where's the dollars going? What accountability is happening when you say that you're going to make 40+% of your budget your police department? When that's so, and that doesn't have any de-escalation, it doesn't have any of the kind of training that will move us from, to go to what Senator Johnson said, the pipeline to prison. If you don't have any spending on that in your priorities as a city or as a state, then that pipeline becomes a really thick lateral that is a commodity, which is our children, feeding. The people who sit on the bench are paid, the deputies are paid, the clerks are paid, the correctional officers are paid, the counselors are paid, the lawyers are paid. That's all business.
So then let's ask this question being real. How do we change anything? Because we've had soldiers on the front line working hard. I know a lot of times people get hits being in the political seats, but you've been there working hard, but nothing has changed. What do we have to do that's from a revolutionary standpoint that the people can help you when you're armed with the people, not just yourself, us coming behind you? What can we do to say we need some better changes? Because it's not just with the money, although that's part of it, but what can the power of the people in itself do to help move these things further?
Senator, why don't you mention, because one of the things that, I want to say to that is I want to go back to education and informing people, but maybe you can give a light, because I can give all the years since 2003 light of what the committees look like, who the people are who come, and how informed we are as a community, when a hearing is going on and when the budget is going on.
I think the first thing that we've done since the past almost 8 years that I've been there is that we elected a Democratic governor. We now have Governor Tony Evers. And I was able to see from this budget how having that stopgap helped, especially in terms of Milwaukee. The Republicans were going to take an additional $14 million from shared revenue from Milwaukee County. Because we got together, all of the Milwaukee delegates, and wrote a letter to him as a delegation asking him to veto that portion of the budget, he did. So that was $14 million in revenue that was saved for Milwaukee by the Democratic governor. When Milwaukee stands up and they come out to vote, we are able to make massive changes. Governor Evers would have never won the governorship if it wasn't for those votes from Milwaukee. And so as long as Milwaukee continues to vote, continues to make sure that they are at the table, then we'll continue to see things change.
When the committee was meeting, and one of the things that we see often in committees is that we're not there in the room. And so we've grown and we're coming in the room a little more, but to be informed, to be engaged at the committee hearings, to be engaged when something happens, to say we don't like that and we want something different, all of that is, extremely important. But the last thing I'll say is remember that voting is one thing.
Okay.
But it's only the beginning.
Just the beginning.
You've got to make sure that people do what they say they were going to do. So to say, exactly. So to say that, Governor Evers did a veto of $14 million that was not going to go to Milwaukee County, matter of fact, connected to the pipeline to prison, by the way, where we would be a commodity again, right? Him doing that was huge, right, that he did it. But I want to be very clear, there's so much more, right, that needed to be able to be done. If we had the Senate, then the committee would have had to do the compromise at that place. You'd have the Assembly and the Senate, and you'd have to get some compromise. So it's really important that we help to win the houses. It's important also that as an average citizen, though, that you are engaged so you know.
So what can an average citizen do? Because we have this budget meeting listening session coming up today on the 27th. What can they do otherwise? How can they get into those committees just to hear, whether it's via Access Television or getting notes from their state senator or legislator? What's a way that they can get their ear and their voice inside those rooms?
Their phones. They can go to Wisconsin Eye and participate and see those committees. And they can write letters and send emails, but they can show up today. Right. You can show up today. You still got time.
What can we do that's more radical, though? Because this is what I'm saying. I see, like I said, the brilliant work that's being done. I listen to you and I can hear the intelligence. I can see that you studied this. But also I look at our condition and it hasn't changed. And it's like we can keep doing the same type of thing. But what can we do to push it even further. For example, Chris Avery, the county executive, said race is a public health issue. So we put our money where our mouth is. Where can this budget go to serve as some type of Milwaukee reparations if you want to serve on it? I'm talking about things like that.
Got you.
So what would you suggest? Because it's like sometimes being inside that room, you know some things people don't. You say, man, if you could do this, won't y'all do that? And I can have your back even more.
We need the advocates to continue to push, but we need more people to join advocacy. And I think for me, that's one of the biggest issues, is because you can go to Madison and fight for Milwaukee all you want, but you need to have the numbers behind you. When we talk about, incarceration, 80% of the females that are incarcerated in both adult and juvenile facilities, 80% have a diagnosis mental health issue. When you talk about male juveniles, you're looking at somewhere around 60%, but 38% for adult males. So not only are we incarcerating people, but we're using that as a way to deal with mental health issues. If these individuals had access to the help that they needed, that in itself would decrease the number of people that we see incarcerated on a daily basis.
So let me ask you this, because what happens when we all get together, we got so many ideas. We're talking about the budget, the listening session. I want you to give our viewing audience a reason why they should get up, because it's 7 o'clock in the morning. They don't even want to get out of bed. But this is about to happen at 9:30. What will they get from today's session, and what are some things they can do to kind of educate themselves quickly that they could read up on, or to be able to ask questions? Because I'm reading this stuff, tax levies, short-term funding, long-term funding with expenditures and revenues. I'm like, this is blowing me out of my mind. What can they do to give themselves a Cliff Notes version to be adequately prepared for today?
I would tell them to start with reading the paper. Go to the Milwaukee Journal and research Governor Evers' budget, then go and research his vetoes. That gives you a sense of exactly where the budget is right now. And if you have a particular area of interest, come armed with those questions so that we can answer them. We may not be able to give you the answer immediately, but we can definitely get your information and give you the information at a follow-up.
Senator Taylor?
We're going to have a huge panel. We're going to have maybe 5 to 10 minutes each to be able to speak. And people will be able to ask some questions, maybe, if they cut it off. So what I say to people is, at the very least, come so that you can meet your electeds and you can ask questions of them. And if you don't know what to ask, you can tell them what matters to you and what you want to see different. I say stay home if you think it's all good. Stay home if you want it to stay this way. But if you want change, if you want it to be different, then you got to come and be in the room and make sure that your voice, your perspective is spoken. And because right now, I would argue that we don't have enough of that, whether it's at the state, federal, city, or the county level. We need you to come.
Look at you. Listen, we're going to be back at the Unspeakable Truth. We're going to be back, and when we come back, I'm going to be replaced, and we're going to see your new co-host, Mr. Jermaine Reed, talk with the senators. And we're going to finish up talking on our listening budget here at the Unspeakable Truth, where we speak nothing but truth, but we speak it in love.
Welcome back to the Unspeakable Truth. I'm your co-host, Jermaine Reed. I'm delighted to be at the table with Senators Latonya Johnson and Lena Taylor. And we're going to continue the conversation that was started by our brother, our friend, Kwaku Ramel Smith Atrophy, and about the state budget, state, local, county budget, city budget. How do Black people benefit from these budgets? Because whether we're talking about on the state level, Tommy Thompson, Scott McCallum, Jim Doyle, Walker administration, or Evers administration now, the condition of Black people in Wisconsin, for the most part, has not been very good. In fact, Wisconsin is known to be one of the worst place, if not the worst place in the country for Black people to live. So we're talking about decades and decades and decades of policies and budgets that for whatever reason have not really benefited us. What needs to happen to change, change the outcomes?
Well, I want to first say that I wish that Governor Evers would have kind of pushed back more with the Republicans during this budget process, but thank goodness for the places that he did push back, because we were able to get funding for Milwaukee County, as Senator Johnson stated. But the truth of the matter is, it's only been a handful of administrations that have really had an opportunity to create a pipeline and to be concerned about that pipeline. Walker started with saying he wasn't doing for Milwaukee. He stopped it at Wauwatosa and acted like Milwaukee wasn't even there, when he did one of his first speeches. Doyle was one of the few that created pathways. And for me, I believe it's rooted in empowerment and entrepreneurship. And he created pathways for Black businesses. We met some of the state standards that we had never met in the history of the state for minority business development. So it matters who the executive is, whether it is at the gubernatorial level, the county level, the city level, or for that matter, who that executive is at even a school board level, how those contracts get distributed, whether it's the Wisconsin Center District, whatever it is, it matters whether or not minorities get access from an entrepreneurial place, from an employment place, in order to have wealth. And we've not had that. Okay.
Well, from your perspective.
I think we're starting to see some of the investments in Milwaukee that Governor Evers is making, such as with WITIC, the $1 million that's going to be available for small businesses that are near the 30th Street corridor. I think if Governor Walker would have been in office, that investment would have never happened here in the city of Milwaukee. But I think as time goes on, depending on who is in the governor's seat, money can be earmarked specifically for communities. That can be written into the budget. And we saw Governor Evers try to do some of that, and it was taken out by the Republican. But we still need to have specific investment in Milwaukee, and that's something that we have to continue to fight for. I came off of doing doors, and I did doors in 53206. And I was looking at my walk list for so many of these addresses where the houses had been raised. And that means that for that particular community, property tax revenue will not be generated again in that area unless somebody comes and builds. And the likelihood of that to happen is pretty much zero. So it's going to be dependent on our government to specifically want to address these issues. And if the interest isn't there, we're going to continue to see that lack of investment like we've seen before.
And that's part of what I had said with Dr. Smith, also is you do need that, exactly what the senator said, you need that at an executive level. And so if we don't realize that racism is an issue in the city of Milwaukee, but we realize it at the county, that's a fundamental problem. If we do not prioritize business development, that's a problem. And even though we did get $1 million that's going in the 30th Street corridor, that's, I will say better than nothing, right? But I also want to be fair, even to, yep, I'm saying it out loud, even to Governor Walker, because we did get funding for minority business development across all the minority groups. And so creating that and getting that table. So I'm glad to see that Evers is doing something, but imagine if that concentration had existed in a city to inspire individuals and motivate individuals to be innovative and to be able to support those businesses to develop. Who, like the senator said, who's coming to a place where you don't get an opportunity, where your kids go to school and they don't want to come back, and then in addition to that, you buy a house and it loses value, your taxes, are high, and the services that you get are dwindling because most of those dollars are going to a police department that's not even dealing with de-escalation and all of those tools that you need, and the schools are challenged. Who's gonna invest in that? As young people, you want to go to a place where the schools are vibrant and the opportunity is vibrant.
Right. And I think the piece with WITIC and getting investment strategically from them is huge.
Okay.
Because WITIC, as it was before in the past administration, deals with mostly businesses that have profits of $400,000 or more. That does not, that would not be applicable to the majority of the small businesses that we have here in the city of Milwaukee. So making them invest in small business at a much smaller dollar amount, especially in the 30th Street corridor, is huge.
So these budgets, because they kind of impact folks in different ways, but they should be working in concert or in unity on some levels. So when we start talking about closing the racial wealth gap, and we have the largest or close to the largest in the country.
Again, like what you said earlier.
And this has been a legacy. This is not something that just happened overnight, but it's continual. So when we look at land being wealth, you start talking about public investments, we start talking about entrepreneur business development in our community. 98% of the U.S. land is owned by white owners. White folks own about 88% of business in America. So the business sales revenue is going to white folks. How does that look in Wisconsin? What do we need to do? Because if we're talking about moving from a state of dependency,
Correct.
to power and liberation, that's entrepreneurship. So what does that look like here?
First of all, let me bring those figures right on dead smack home. I'm on the block that I grew up on. We lost all of our black banks under the present administration. We lost, very candidly, home ownership, black home ownership.
Yes.
We have a foreclosure crisis. We have a homelessness crisis. It's our vets and, our children. That's the part that I really want to resonate for people. Yes. Our children are homeless and are going to school, and you see some of the success stories for some of them, but the challenges that they have to go through going through that. And I bring homelessness up because the biggest thing of value that most people have and will ever have,
their home.
Is their home.
Absolutely.
And so if we're going to change wealth, we're going to have to address home ownership. And if we're going to address home ownership, we're going to have to stair step it or baby step it through the process for people. And so if it was up to me, I would be taking the foreclosed properties and using them as outdoor classrooms, to be very candid, to give people pathways to those E things I said: education, employment, and entrepreneurship. And in particular, I would let them learn the trades. Guess what? We ain't got no money to do lead laterals. I would do a training program so people can learn how to do lead laterals. Because why should the company that has the most contracts to do lead laterals in the city of Milwaukee be individuals who have employees that are running around with Confederate flag stickers and, blah, blah, blah. So we have to start with where the people are, teaching them what they need to, and then teaching those individuals to go to the small business, the people who have the idea for the business. We're at rock bottom for helping people who want to start businesses. So money has to be designated for that also.
What should black folks be doing as it relates to this wave that's coming through with hemp and CBD? And, how do we make sure that we're on that boat? Or on that train. We don't want to be on the boats. We want to be on the train. How do we get on that train? Well, we
didn't get high-speed rail messing with Governor Walker.
I would say the one thing that they need to do is to be educated. Even though hemp is legal, we have to be honest and say that there has been issues. There has been issues where people have lost their jobs with legal hemp, because in the state of Wisconsin, hemp has a THC blend. It's not supposed to be any higher than 0.3%. But if a plant if seeds with higher concentration are used, if the plant stays in the ground longer, if it's not watered properly or cared for properly, and it's harvested, once it's tested, if it's above that amount, it's supposed to be burned. But because it's not regulated in the state of Wisconsin, people are actually failing drug tests for the THC blends because it's not regulated. You don't know necessarily where it came from and you have to buy from someplace safe?
First of all, I want to say that the main issue is that there are no testing standards out there that can distinguish. So, for example, we both have glasses of juice. Okay, they're from the same family. Our amount we have in each are not necessarily the same. Our strawberries are not the same. Okay, so marijuana is cannabis. Hemp is cannabis. They're the same ingredients, all of that, but they're different. Marijuana has THC that is above 0.3. Hemp has THC that is 0.3 or under 0.3. So what does that mean? Not even 1%. Normally marijuana's 20-something%, that people try to get what highest percentage they can, so to say. You don't even have 1% THC in hemp. We also made it where even if it's a hot crop, it can be diverted in its use. They don't have to necessarily burn it, but it can't be used in that high account for like a smokable, or it can't be used even for CBD. You can now extract the THC from it so that product could still be used to make maybe hempcrete or maybe hemp wood or rope or so many other things that it could be made. The biggest issue that the senator brought up that people need to understand is testing is a place of challenge. There is not a test that is going to tell you whether or not it was marijuana or hemp when you test it in a person's system. So what does that mean? That means it's just going to tell you that you had THC in your system. So we've not educated enough people even in our state to be able to understand that piece. So the Department of Child Welfare, people's employers, schools, all of that. People are having challenges with law enforcement. Law enforcement is saying, well, your strawberry look like hemp to me. I mean, look like marijuana to me. So I tell you what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna give you a ticket, you can go to court and work that out. You go to court, the testing comes back from the lab that's not instant, that says, no, they look alike, but this is hemp. It's not cannabis. That costs you money. Now your time, whatever happened with your job, if you're dealing with something with your kid, all of those things, you had to get representation. I'm a lawyer. Lawyers ain't cheap.
Well, listen, this has been a great conversation. We probably could go on and on and on. We certainly want to encourage folks today at 9:30 a.m. to get out to Mother Catherine Daniels Conference Center located at 3500. 3500 North
Mother Daniels Way.
Catherine Daniels Way, yes. Formerly 35th and Hampton, so I'm sorry about that, but yes. And so you can continue this conversation, get more information. We want you to get involved. Thank you for tuning in to The Unspeakable Truth with your host, Jermaine Reed, and Dr. Ramel Smith. Thank you, Senator Taylor, and thank you, Senator Latonya Johnson, for joining us here at the table. You all be well and be safe. Until next time.
Trust what's right before our eyes.
Believe half of what you see
and a third of what you heard.
Dig in between the lines of the written word.
The weak whispers,
afraid to speak truth to power.
Watered down apologies,
Let it water.
Critical thinkers bring power to truth. Dismantle fake proof with unspeakable truth.